The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the weathered building that served as Colfax's general store, and Wilhelmina Rosewood stepped down into the dusty California street with her traveling bag clutched tight in both hands, her heart hammering against her ribs as three familiar faces materialized from the crowd like specters from a past she had desperately tried to escape. Her mother was the first to speak, her voice carrying across the rutted street with that particular edge that had haunted Wilhelmina's childhood. "You have made your point, daughter. Now gather your things and come home where you belong." Behind her mother stood her older brother Thomas and her father, both wearing expressions of stern disapproval that Wilhelmina had seen 1,000 times before. They had traveled all the way from Sacramento to retrieve her, to drag her back to the suffocating parlor and the marriage arrangement they had made without her consent, to a banker's son with soft hands and a crueler disposition than any man she had ever known. "I am not going back," Wilhelmina said, her voice steadier than she felt. The September sun beat down on them all, turning the street into a shimmering ribbon of heat and dust. It was 1872, and she had been in Colfax for only 3 weeks, but in those weeks she had tasted something she had never known in Sacramento's finest neighborhoods. Freedom. Her father stepped forward, his face reddening beneath his expensive hat. "This is nonsense. You are 20 years old, unmarried, and living in this godforsaken mining town like some common woman. The scandal alone has nearly ruined us." "Then I suppose you should return to Sacramento and manage your scandal," Wilhelmina replied, surprised by her own boldness. "I have accepted a position teaching at the schoolhouse here. The children need an education, and I need a purpose beyond sitting in a parlor waiting for a husband I do not want." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "You will come back to town with us this instant. We have indulged this childish rebellion long enough." "No," the word came out firm, final. "I am staying here." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of a wagon creaking past and the distant ring of a hammer on anvil from the blacksmith's shop. Then a new voice entered the conversation, deep and rough as river stones, coming from somewhere behind Wilhelmina. "The lady has made her decision clear." Wilhelmina turned to see a man she had noticed around town but never spoken to directly. He was tall, powerfully built, with shoulders that seemed to span half the width of the boardwalk. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, sun-streaked and slightly wild. His face was weathered from years spent outdoors, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of beard growth, but it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue and steady, holding a quiet strength that made her breath catch. "This is a family matter," her father said coldly. "It does not concern you, sir. Concerns me when I see 3 people trying to force a woman to do something she has clearly stated she will not do." The man moved closer, and Wilhelmina could see the muscles in his forearms beneath his rolled sleeves, the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Name is Coleman Quade. I guide hunting parties in the mountains, trap during winter, and I know every person in this town. Miss Rosewood has earned respect here for her work with the children. She stays or goes by her own choice, not yours." Thomas bristled. "How dare you interfere? Our sister is not some frontier woman. She was raised with every advantage, educated at the finest schools. Then she is educated enough to make her own decisions." Coleman interrupted. His voice was not loud, but it carried an authority that made Thomas fall silent. "You have your answer. Best you folks head back before the afternoon stage leaves." Wilhelmina's mother turned her cold gaze on her daughter one last time. "If you refuse to come home now, do not expect us to take you back when this foolishness ends and you find yourself ruined and alone." Something inside Wilhelmina cracked open at those words, some last remnant of the dutiful daughter she had always tried to be. "I will not be coming back," she said softly. "Not now, not ever. I am staying here, and I am going to make a life for myself that is my own." Her father made a sound of disgust, turning sharply on his heel. Her mother followed, spine rigid with fury, and Thomas lingered only a moment longer before trailing after them. Wilhelmina watched them climb back into their hired carriage, watched the driver snap the reins, watched them disappear down the road toward the stage station without looking back. Only when they were completely out of sight did she realize she was shaking. Her bag slipped from her fingers and hit the dusty boardwalk with a soft thud. "You all right, miss?" Coleman asked quietly. She turned to face him, this stranger who had stood up for her when no one else had. Up close, she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his shirt stretched across his broad chest. He was perhaps 26 or 27, weathered but not old, strong in a way that spoke of years spent testing himself against the wilderness. "I am now," she said, and found she meant it. "Thank you, Mr. Quade, that was very kind of you." He shook his head slightly. "Just seemed like the right thing to do. You have been teaching my niece Emma. She comes home every day excited about her reading lessons. First time she has been excited about school since her mother passed last year." Wilhelmina felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Emma is a bright child. She learns quickly. Her father is my brother Marcus. He runs the livery stable. I stay with them when I am in town between trapping seasons." Coleman picked up her bag and handed it to her. "You have somewhere to stay?" "I rent a room above the dress shop from Mrs. Chen. It is small but comfortable." He nodded. "Good. This town is not like Sacramento, but it is honest. People work hard, look after their own. You will do well here if you give it a chance." "I intend to," Wilhelmina said, meeting his eyes. "I intend to do more than well. I intend to live." Something in Coleman's expression shifted, a flicker of understanding or recognition, and he gave her a slow nod. "Then I will look forward to seeing how that turns out, Miss Rosewood." He tipped his hat to her and walked away, his long stride carrying him down the street toward the livery stable. Wilhelmina watched him go, her heart still racing but no longer from fear. Something had changed in those few moments, something fundamental and irreversible. She had chosen her own path, and somehow that choice had brought Coleman Quade into her life. The afternoon sun continued to beat down on Colfax's dusty streets as Wilhelmina picked up her bag and headed toward the dress shop. Behind the counter, Mrs. Chen looked up from her sewing and smiled. "I saw what happened out there," the older woman said in her accented English. "You are a brave woman, Miss Rosewood. Very brave." "Or very foolish," Wilhelmina replied, climbing the narrow stairs to her room. "Sometimes they are the same thing," Mrs. Chen called after her. "But I think not this time. I think this time you are just brave." In her small room with its single window overlooking the street, Wilhelmina set down her bag and sank onto the narrow bed. Her hands were still trembling slightly. She had just severed ties with her family, with everything she had known for 20 years. The security of her father's wealth, the social connections of her mother's circle, the certainty of a predetermined future, all gone. In their place was only this small room, a teaching position that paid barely enough to survive, and the enormous, terrifying freedom to shape her own life. She thought of Coleman Quade's steady eyes, his quiet strength, the way he had stepped in without hesitation when she needed someone. She barely knew him, but something about his presence had made her feel safer than she had felt in months, perhaps years. The next morning, Wilhelmina woke early and prepared for the school day. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden structure at the edge of town, with 12 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Emma Quade was 8, dark-haired like her uncle, with the same pale blue eyes and serious expression. She sat in the front row and absorbed every lesson with fierce concentration. During the lunch break, while the children played outside, Emma approached Wilhelmina's desk. "Miss Rosewood, my Uncle Cole says you are very brave." Wilhelmina looked up in surprise. "He said that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "He told my papa that you stood up to your whole family and chose your own path. He said that takes more courage than facing down a bear in the mountains. Your uncle is very kind, but I am not certain I was brave. I was simply doing what I needed to do." "Uncle Cole says that is what bravery is," Emma replied. "Doing what you need to do even when you are scared. He says most people let fear make their choices for them." Out of the mouths of children, Wilhelmina thought, come the wisest words. "Your uncle sounds like a very wise man. He is the best man I know," Emma said with absolute certainty. "When Mama died, he stayed with us for 3 whole months even though it was trapping season and he needed to work. He made sure Papa did not fall apart and he took care of me when Papa could not stop crying. He is strong and good, and he never lies, not ever." Wilhelmina felt her throat tighten at the devotion in the child's voice. "You are very lucky to have him. He is lonely though," Emma said, her young face suddenly serious. "He does not think I notice, but I do. When he comes back from the mountains, he always looks sad for a little while, like he is missing something he has not found yet." Before Wilhelmina could respond, the other children began filing back inside, and Emma returned to her seat. But the conversation stayed with Wilhelmina throughout the afternoon. And when school ended and the children scattered to their homes, she found herself thinking about the mountain man who had defended her, who had shown such loyalty to his family, who carried loneliness like a weight on those broad shoulders. That evening, as she was leaving the schoolhouse, she saw Coleman walking toward her. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his hair still damp from washing, wearing a fresh shirt that somehow made him look even more imposing. "Miss Rosewood," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I wanted to make sure those people had not come back to bother you. They left on yesterday's stage," Wilhelmina said. "I received a note from the station master confirming it. Good." He shifted his weight slightly, looking almost uncomfortable. "I also wanted to apologize if I overstepped yesterday. It was not my place to interfere in your family matters." "You did not overstep," Wilhelmina said quickly. "You helped me when I needed it most. I am grateful, Mr. Quade, truly." He met her eyes, and that same flicker of understanding passed between them. "Coleman," he said. "Most folks call me Coleman or just Cole." "Then you must call me Wilhelmina, though I warn you it is rather a mouthful." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen from him. "It is a strong name. Suits you." They stood there in the golden late afternoon light, and Wilhelmina felt something shift in the air between them, some recognition or possibility that made her pulse quicken. He was so different from any man she had known in Sacramento, so solid and real, without pretense or performance. "Would you care to walk with me?" Coleman asked suddenly. "There is a trail just outside town that leads up to a viewpoint. You can see the whole valley from there. It is beautiful this time of day." Wilhelmina knew she should probably decline, knew that it might not be entirely proper to go walking alone with a man she barely knew, but she had not chosen freedom only to cage herself with the same old rules. "I would like that very much," she said. They walked together through town, past the saloon and the general store, and the tiny church with its whitewashed steeple. People nodded to Coleman as they passed, and Wilhelmina noticed the respect in their greetings, the genuine warmth. This was a man who had earned his place in this community. The trail began where the buildings ended, winding up through scrub oak and manzanita. Coleman walked ahead, clearing branches from the path, glancing back regularly to make sure she could manage in her long skirt. The climb was steep in places, but Wilhelmina found she enjoyed the physical exertion, the way her breath came faster, the stretch and pull of muscles unused to such work. "You do all right with the walking," Coleman observed. "I may have been raised in a parlor, but I have always preferred the outdoors," Wilhelmina replied, slightly breathless. "My mother despaired of me. I was forever escaping to the garden or sneaking out to walk by the river. That why you came here? To a place where you could be outside?" Wilhelmina considered the question carefully. "I came here because I needed to prove to myself that I could survive on my own terms. The teaching position was advertised in Sacramento, and I applied without telling my family. When I was hired, I simply packed a bag and left. That took courage or desperation." She paused to catch her breath, leaning against a boulder. "They wanted me to marry a man I could not stand. He was wealthy and connected, and my parents could not understand why I objected. But he was cruel, Coleman. I saw how he treated his servants, his horses, anyone he considered beneath him. I knew that once I married him, I would become his property, and he would treat me no better." Coleman's jaw tightened. "No woman should be property. Tell that to the law," Wilhelmina said with more bitterness than she intended. "A woman's choices are limited to obedience or scandal. I chose scandal." They continued climbing, and the trail opened onto a flat outcropping of rock that jutted out over the valley. The view was breathtaking. Below them, Colfax spread out like a child's toy town, and beyond it the valley stretched in shades of gold and green, stitched through with the silver ribbon of the river. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and blue in the fading light. "Oh," Wilhelmina breathed, "this is magnificent." Coleman stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I come up here when I need to think, or when the towns start to feel too small. Up in the mountains, everything is clear. You know exactly what you are dealing with. The weather, the animals, the land. It is honest in a way people rarely are. Is that why you became a mountain man, to escape people?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant peaks. "My wife died 7 years ago. Fever took her in the space of 3 days. We had been married less than a year. After that, I could not stand to be around people and their sympathy, their pitying looks. The mountains were the only place I could breathe." Wilhelmina felt her heart constrict. "I am so sorry, Coleman. It was a long time ago. I have made peace with it, mostly. But it changed me. I am not suited to town life anymore, to settling down. The wilderness is where I belong now. Do you ever get lonely?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Coleman turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Every day. But lonely in town is worse than lonely in the mountains. At least there, I am alone by choice." They stood in silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Wilhelmina thought about loneliness, about the years she had spent in her parents' house, feeling utterly alone despite being constantly surrounded by people, about the isolation of living a life that was not truly yours. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly. "I think I needed to see this to remember why I made the choice I made." "You will not regret it," Coleman said. "Life out here is harder, but it is real. You will find your place." He walked her back to town as twilight deepened into night, the conversation flowing easily between them. He told her about the mountains, about tracking elk and bear, about the harsh beauty of winter in the high country. She told him about the books she loved, about her dreams of traveling, about her students and their progress. At the door to the dress shop, Coleman paused. "I leave in 3 days for a hunting trip. I will be gone about 2 weeks, but when I return, may I call on you properly?" Wilhelmina felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I would like that very much." He smiled, and it transformed his face, softening the hard edges. "Good night, Wilhelmina. Good night, Coleman." She climbed stairs to her room, feeling lighter than she had in months. Mrs. Chen looked up from her sewing with knowing eyes but said nothing, and Wilhelmina was grateful for the discretion. The next 3 days passed quickly, filled with teaching and lesson planning and getting to know the town better. Several women invited her to tea, curious about the schoolteacher who had defied her wealthy family. Wilhelmina found herself welcomed more warmly than she had expected, accepted not despite her scandal but because of it. These were frontier women who understood the courage it took to forge your own path. On the morning Coleman was due to leave, Wilhelmina walked to the livery stable before school. She found him loading supplies onto a pack mule, his movements efficient and practiced. He looked up as she approached, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. "Wilhelmina, I did not expect to see you. I wanted to wish you safe travels," she said, suddenly feeling foolish, "and to thank you again for your kindness." Coleman set down the pack he was holding and walked over to her. Standing this close, she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, acutely aware of his size, his strength, the barely leashed power in his frame. "You be careful while I am gone," he said. "If anyone gives you trouble, you go to my brother Marcus or to Sheriff Dawson. They will look after you." "I will be fine," Wilhelmina assured him. "I am quite capable of looking after myself." "I know you are, but it makes me feel better to know there are people watching out for you." The concern in his voice made her chest tighten. "Then I promise to call on them if I need help. Will you be careful as well?" "Emma told me there are bears in the mountains." "Emma talks too much," Coleman said, but there was affection in his tone. "I have been dealing with bears for years. They are mostly more scared of me than I am of them." "Mostly?" "Mostly," he grinned. "Do not worry about me, Wilhelmina. I always come back." She wanted to say something more, to articulate the strange feeling of connection she felt with this man she barely knew, but the words would not come. Instead, she simply said, "I will see you when you return. Count on it." She walked to the schoolhouse thinking about Coleman heading into the mountains, about the dangers he would face, about how quickly he had become important to her. It was absurd, really. They had spent perhaps 3 hours together in total. Yet something about him called to her in a way no one ever had. A recognition that went deeper than words or logic. The 2 weeks passed slowly. Wilhelmina threw herself into her teaching, expanding the curriculum to include geography and basic science. She organized a reading competition that had the children excitedly devouring every book they could find. She helped Mrs. Chen with sewing in the evenings, learning to alter her Sacramento dresses to be more practical for frontier life. And every day, she found herself thinking about Coleman, wondering where he was, if he was safe when he would return. On the 15th day, Emma burst into the schoolhouse during afternoon lessons, her face flushed with excitement. "Miss Rosewood, Uncle Cole is back. He just rode in." Wilhelmina's heart leaped, but she kept her voice calm. "That is wonderful news, Emma. Now please return to your seat so we can finish our arithmetic lesson." But she could barely concentrate on the lesson, and when school finally ended, she found herself walking toward the livery stable, without consciously deciding to do so. She saw Coleman before he saw her, standing in the stable yard brushing down his horse. He looked thinner, more weathered, with a fresh scar across his knuckles, but when he turned and saw her, his whole face lit up. Wilhelmina. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Welcome back," she said, walking closer. "Emma told me you had returned. Just got in about an hour ago. I was going to clean up and come find you, but here you are." He set down the brush, his eyes drinking her in. "Did you miss me?" The directness of the question startled her. In Sacramento, such honesty would have been considered crass, but here with Coleman, it felt right. Yes, she said simply, I did. His smile was slow and warm, reaching all the way to his eyes. Good, because I missed you something fierce. Spent half the trip thinking about you, about our walk, about the way you look when you are thinking hard about something. Coleman. I know it is fast, he interrupted. I know we barely know each other. But up in those mountains, alone with my thoughts, I kept coming back to you. To the courage it took for you to stand up to your family, to start fresh in a place where you knew no one. To the way you light up when you talk about your students. To the feeling I get when I am around you, like maybe I have finally found something I did not even know I was looking for. Wilhelmina's breath caught. I feel it too. I have tried to tell myself it is too soon, too foolish, but I cannot stop thinking about you. About talking with you, about the way you make me feel safe and excited all at once. Coleman stepped closer, so close she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, smell the scent of pine and leather that clung to him. I am not good at this, at courtship and pretty words. I am better at actions than speeches. But I need you to know that my intentions are honorable. I am not looking to trifle with you. I am too old and too worn for games. What are you looking for, Coleman? Wilhelmina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A partner. Someone to share my life with, who understands that I need the mountains, but who might also give me a reason to want to come back to town more often. Someone strong enough to stand on their own, but willing to let me stand beside them. Someone like you. Wilhelmina felt tears prick her eyes. I left Sacramento to escape a marriage that would have made me miserable. I swore to myself I would never let anyone control my life again. But what you are describing does not sound like control. It sounds like partnership. It is, Coleman said firmly. I saw how you stood up to your family, how you chose yourself. I would never ask you to give that up. I want you exactly as you are, strong and stubborn and free. I just want to be part of your life while you are living it. Then yes, Wilhelmina said, her heart soaring. Yes, you can court me, Coleman Quade, properly and openly. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and strong, completely engulfing her smaller hand. I will do right by you, Wilhelmina. I promise you that. They stood there in the stable yard, hands clasped as the autumn sun painted everything gold. Around them, Colfax went about its business, but for Wilhelmina the whole world had narrowed to this moment, to this man, to the promise of something real and honest and entirely her own choice. Over the following weeks, Coleman courted her with a straightforward intensity that left no doubt about his feelings. He took her on long walks, showed her hidden places in the hills, taught her to identify animal tracks, and read the weather in the clouds. He came to the schoolhouse and sat in the back row, watching her teach with undisguised admiration. He brought her small gifts, nothing expensive but deeply thoughtful. A hawk feather for her desk, a smooth river stone the exact shade of blue as her favorite dress, a book of poetry he had ordered special from Sacramento. In return, Wilhelmina brought him into her world of words and ideas. She read to him in the evenings, everything from adventure novels to scientific treatises. She taught him about the music she loved, the art she had studied, the philosophy that had shaped her thinking. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, discovering each other with the eager intensity of people who had waited a long time to find someone who truly understood them. The town watched their courtship with approval. Coleman Quade was respected, and Wilhelmina had proven herself dedicated and capable. People began to talk about a winter wedding, to speculate about where they might live, whether Coleman would give up his mountain life. One evening in late October, as they walked back from another sunset viewing at their special spot, Wilhelmina asked him about it. Will it bother you, being tied to the town if we marry? I know how much you need the wilderness. Coleman was quiet for a long moment. I have been thinking about that. I cannot give up the mountains entirely. They are part of who I am. But I have also been thinking that maybe I have been using them as an escape, a way to avoid dealing with the loss I experienced. Being with you makes me want to be present, to build something instead of just surviving. I would never ask you to give up something that important to you, Wilhelmina said. That would make me no better than my parents, trying to force you into a shape that is not yours. What if we found a middle way? Coleman suggested. I have been looking at land up in the foothills about an hour's ride from town. Good timber, a creek running through it, enough game to supplement our food. We could build a cabin there, live closer to the wild but still near enough to Colfax that you could teach, that we could be part of the community. best of both worlds. Wilhelmina felt excitement flutter in her chest. A cabin in the foothills? I would build it myself, make it solid and warm. Big enough for a family someday if you wanted that. Close enough to nature that I could breathe, but with you there it would feel like home instead of exile. It sounds perfect, Wilhelmina said, and realized she meant it. A life split between wilderness and civilization, belonging fully to neither but finding home in the space between. It was exactly what they both needed. Then marry me, Coleman said, stopping on the trail and turning to face her. I know it is fast, but I am certain about this, about you, about us. Marry me, Wilhelmina Rosewood, and let me spend the rest of my life proving I was worthy of your trust. Tears spilled down Wilhelmina's cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes. Yes, Coleman, I will marry you. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt the strength of him, the solid realness of his body against hers. He smelled like pine and leather and something uniquely him, and when he tilted her chin up and kissed her, gentle and reverent, Wilhelmina felt like she had finally come home. They were married in early November in the small whitewashed church with most of Colfax in attendance. Emma served as flower girl, beaming with pride. Marcus stood as best man, tears running unashamedly down his face as he watched his brother marry. Mrs. Chen had made Wilhelmina's dress, simple but beautiful in cream-colored silk, practical enough to wear again but special enough for the occasion. Wilhelmina had written to her parents about the wedding, not expecting them to attend but feeling they should know. They did not respond, and she felt a pang of sadness but also a sense of closure. She had made her choice, and she had chosen well. After the ceremony, the whole town gathered for a celebration at the saloon. There was food and music and dancing, and Wilhelmina discovered that Coleman, despite his claims of being rough around the edges, could dance quite well. He held her close as they moved to the music, his hand warm on her waist, his eyes never leaving her face. "Happy?" he murmured. "Happier than I have ever been," she replied honestly. They spent their wedding night in a room at the boarding house, neither ready yet to make the ride up to where Coleman would build their cabin. He was gentle with her, patient and careful, and Wilhelmina felt grateful for his experience, for the way he made her feel cherished and desired without being rushed or frightened. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Wilhelmina thought about how different this was from what her life would have been. If she had stayed in Sacramento, she would have married the banker's son and spent her wedding night dreading the touch of a man she despised. Instead, she was here, with Coleman, feeling safe and loved and entirely herself. "What are you thinking?" Coleman asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I made the right choice, that refusing to go back to town was the best decision I ever made." She felt him smile against her hair. "I am glad you stayed. I cannot imagine my life without you now." The next morning they rode up to the land Coleman had been eyeing, and Wilhelmina saw immediately why he had chosen it. The site sat on a gentle slope overlooking a valley, with a creek running clear and cold through one corner. Tall pines provided shade and shelter, and the view stretched for miles, all the way to the blue mountains in the distance. "It is perfect," she breathed. "We can start building next week," Coleman said. "Marcus has agreed to help, and some of the other men from town. With enough hands, we can have the basic structure up before the worst of winter hits. We will stay at the boarding house until it is ready." True to his word, construction began within days. Coleman had been planning this for weeks, had already cut and seasoned timber, had drawn up plans that showed a real gift for design. The cabin would have 2 large rooms initially, with space to add on later. A bedroom and a main living area that would serve as kitchen and parlor. A wide porch across the front, a stone fireplace, windows positioned to catch the morning light. Wilhelmina helped as much as she could while still maintaining her teaching duties. She brought lunch to the worksite, held timber steady while Coleman and Marcus secured it, learned to chink the gaps between logs with mud and moss. Her hands grew rough with work, and she loved it, loved the visible evidence of the life they were building together. In the evenings, she and Coleman would sit by the fire at the boarding house, planning their future. They talked about how many chickens to keep, whether to get a milk cow, how large a garden to plant. They talked about children, both wanting them but agreeing there was no rush. They talked about books and hunting and the changing seasons, about everything and nothing, building a language that was entirely their own. By mid-December, the cabin was habitable. Not finished, but solid and warm, with a good roof and a fireplace that drew perfectly. They moved in just as the first snow began to fall, carrying their few possessions up the mountain trail in the gray afternoon light. That first night in their own home, they made love on a pile of blankets in front of the fire, and Wilhelmina felt a profound sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. She had traveled so far from the Sacramento parlor, from the life her parents had planned for her, and she had arrived here, in this rough cabin in the California foothills, with this strong, honest man who loved her completely. Winter deepened around them. Coleman still went out to check his trap lines, but he was never gone for more than a few days, and he always came back to her. Wilhelmina continued teaching, making the ride down to Colfax 3 days a week, staying with Mrs. Chen on those nights, and returning to the cabin for 4 glorious days alone with Coleman. It was a hard life in some ways. The cold was bitter, and they had to work constantly to keep the cabin warm and supplied with firewood. But it was also beautiful, waking to snow-covered pines and the sound of the creek, to Coleman's arms around her, and the certain knowledge that this was real, this was hers, this was the life she had chosen. In February, a letter arrived from Sacramento. Wilhelmina stared at her mother's handwriting on the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a brief note stating that her father had died of a heart attack in January and that the funeral had already taken place. There was no apology, no warmth, just the bare facts and a cold closing signature. Wilhelmina read it twice, then set it aside and looked at Coleman across the table. "My father is dead." His expression was compassionate, but not pitying. "How do you feel?" She thought about it carefully. "Sad, but not devastated. I mourned losing my parents when they refused to accept my choice. This just makes it final. Do you want to go to Sacramento? Pay your respects?" "No," Wilhelmina said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "My life is here now, with you. Whatever relationship I had with my father ended the day I refused to return to town." Coleman reached across the table and took her hand. "I am sorry you had to lose them to gain your freedom. That should not have been the price." "But it was," Wilhelmina said, "and I would pay it again in a heartbeat, because what I have now is worth more than anything I left behind." Spring came slowly, melting the snow in fits and starts. As the ground thawed, Coleman and Wilhelmina began planting a garden, turning over the rich soil and putting in seeds for vegetables and herbs. Emma came to visit often, delighting in her aunt and uncle's cabin, begging to spend weekends with them. By summer, the garden was flourishing, and Wilhelmina had settled into the rhythm of her new life with complete comfort. She loved the balance of it, the teaching that kept her mind engaged, and the physical work of the homestead that grounded her in her body. She loved the community in Colfax and the solitude of the cabin, but most of all, she loved Coleman, the easy partnership they had built, the way they worked together like 2 parts of a whole. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Wilhelmina reached over and took Coleman's hand. "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, reading something in her expression. "What is it?" "I am pregnant. About 3 months along, I think." For a moment, Coleman just stared at her. Then a smile spread across his face, transforming him. "A baby? We are going to have a baby?" "We are," Wilhelmina confirmed, her own smile matching his. "Are you happy?" Instead of answering, Coleman pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. You have given me everything, Wilhelmina, everything I did not even know I wanted. A home, a purpose, and now a child. I love you so much. I love you too." Wilhelmina whispered against his chest. "So much." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot summer and into autumn. Coleman became even more protective, constantly fussing over Wilhelmina, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. She tolerated it with amused patience, knowing it came from love rather than control. In October, she stopped teaching, her belly too large for the ride into town. Mrs. Chen came to visit often, teaching Wilhelmina what she would need to know about childbirth, about caring for an infant. Marcus brought Emma up regularly, the young girl excited about the cousin she would soon have. The baby came in early December on a snowy afternoon with Mrs. Chen and the town midwife in attendance. It was a boy, healthy and strong-lunged, with dark hair like both his parents and his father's blue eyes. They named him Samuel, and Coleman held his son with tears streaming down his face, utterly undone by the tiny human they had created. "He is perfect," Coleman whispered, "just like his mother." Wilhelmina, exhausted but euphoric, watched her husband cradle their son and felt a love so intense it was almost painful. This was her family, her life, her choice, and it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. The first year of Samuel's life was challenging but joyful. Wilhelmina returned to teaching part-time when Samuel was 6 months old, bringing him along in a basket that she kept beside her desk. The children were fascinated by the baby, and his presence somehow made the schoolhouse feel even more like a family. Coleman proved to be a devoted father, carrying Samuel on his chest when he did chores around the cabin, talking to him constantly, teaching him about the world in a soft voice that made Wilhelmina's heart melt. He was gentle and patient in a way that seemed at odds with his rough exterior, but which she knew was the truest part of him. When Samuel was 18 months old, Wilhelmina discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she felt exhausted and sick for the first several months. Coleman hired a woman from town to help with Samuel in the housework, refusing to let Wilhelmina overexert herself. Their daughter was born in May, a beautiful spring baby with her mother's features and her father's strength. They named her Grace, and she completed their family in a way that felt absolutely right. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel and Grace grew into bright, active children who loved the freedom of their mountain home, but also enjoyed their time in Colfax, surrounded by the community that had embraced their parents. Wilhelmina continued teaching, eventually becoming the head of the school when the previous head retired. Coleman built additions onto the cabin, expanding it to accommodate their growing family, adding his carpentry and craftsmanship until it was a real home, comfortable and beautiful. They celebrated their 5th anniversary in the fall, and Coleman surprised Wilhelmina by taking her back to the spot where he had first brought her, the overlook where the valley spread below them like a promise. They stood together, his arms around her, watching the sunset paint the world in gold and purple. "Do you remember that day?" Coleman asked. "When your family came to bring you back to Sacramento?" "I remember every moment of it," Wilhelmina replied. "I remember being terrified but also certain. And I remember you stepping in, defending my right to choose my own path. Best decision I ever made, getting involved. I saw you standing there, so brave and determined, and I thought, there is a woman worth knowing, a woman worth loving." Wilhelmina turned in his arms to face him. "They pleaded with me to come back to town, tried to convince me I was making a mistake. But I refused. I told them I was staying here, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I could not have articulated why at the time, but I knew I was choosing life instead of mere existence. And I understood," Coleman said softly. "I understood because I had made the same choice years before when I went to the mountains after losing my first wife. Sometimes you have to go against everyone's expectations to find where you truly belong. I belong with you," Wilhelmina said simply. "Here, in this life we have built together, with our children and our home and our community. This is where I was always meant to be." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had each found their way to freedom, and then found each other, building something neither had dared to dream of in those early, lonely days. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and hardship. There were difficult winters when supplies ran low and the cold seemed endless. There were illnesses that frightened them, injuries that required trips to the doctor in town. There were disagreements and frustrations, the normal friction of two strong-willed people building a life together. But through it all, the foundation they had laid remained solid. They were partners in the truest sense, supporting each other's dreams and choices, working together to create a life that honored both their needs. Coleman continued to need time in the wilderness, taking longer trips during the seasons when he could leave, and Wilhelmina never resented those absences because she saw how he came back renewed, ready to be fully present. And Wilhelmina continued to need her work and her independence, and Coleman supported that completely, proud of her accomplishments and never trying to diminish her to make himself feel larger. Samuel grew into a young man much like his father, strong and steady, drawn to the outdoors. Grace was more like her mother, sharp-minded and independent, talking about going to university someday, about becoming a doctor or a lawyer. Coleman and Wilhelmina encouraged both children to follow their passions, to choose their own paths, knowing the value of that freedom. On their 10th anniversary, Wilhelmina looked around at the cabin that had grown with them, at the garden flourishing in the summer sun, at her children playing in the creek, at Coleman working on a new addition that would serve as a proper study for her. She thought about the woman she had been a decade ago, stepping off that stage in Colfax with no idea what she was walking into, only the certainty that she had to try. She thought about her parents' visit, their pleas for her to return to the life they had planned for her, the scandal and safety of Sacramento society. She thought about how she had refused, how she had said those words that had changed everything. I am staying here. And she thought about Coleman, understanding immediately what she needed, respecting her choice, and then gradually becoming part of that choice, weaving himself into the fabric of the life she was creating until she could not imagine it without him. It had been the right decision. Every day since had proven that. Every morning waking beside Coleman, every lesson taught, every seed planted, every sunset watched from their porch, every child's laugh, every shared dream and plan and kiss and conversation, all of it confirmed that she had chosen correctly. Life in the California foothills was not always easy, but it was real and honest and entirely theirs. They had built something beautiful from nothing more than courage and stubbornness and love. As the seasons continued their eternal cycle, Wilhelmina and Coleman aged together, their faces weathering like the wood of their cabin, growing more distinguished with each passing year. Samuel eventually brought home a young woman from town, a blacksmith's daughter with strong hands and a warm laugh. Grace did go to university, one of the first women admitted to the medical college in San Francisco, though she came home every summer and eventually returned permanently to set up a practice in Colfax. More grandchildren arrived, filling the cabin with noise and laughter. Wilhelmina retired from teaching at 55, though she continued to tutor students who needed extra help. Coleman finally gave up his longer trips into the mountains in his 60s, though he still walked the trails around their property every day, checking the creek and the tree line, breathing in the pine-scented air that had sustained him all these years. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. 3 generations gathered on the expanded porch of the cabin that had started as a simple 2-room structure. There was food and music and storytelling, the family history being passed down to the youngest members. Late that evening, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Wilhelmina and Coleman sat together on the porch swing he had built years ago, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. 40 years, Coleman said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. The best 40 years of my life, Wilhelmina replied, her head resting on his shoulder. Everything good I have, everything I am, started the day I refused to leave Colfax. I have never asked you, Coleman said slowly. Do you ever regret it, giving up the wealth and security you would have had in Sacramento? The reconciliation with your family you might have achieved if you had gone back. Wilhelmina lifted her head to look at him, at the face she had loved for 40 years, still handsome despite the lines and gray hair, still strong despite the slight stiffness in his movements. Not for a single moment, not once. That life would have killed something essential in me. This life with you let me become who I was always meant to be. Coleman kissed her forehead. You saved me, you know. I was so lost when I met you, hiding from life in the mountains. You gave me a reason to come back, to be present, to believe that happiness was possible again. We saved each other, Wilhelmina corrected. That is what love does when it is real and freely chosen. It does not diminish either person. It amplifies both. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the creek and the wind in the pines, sounds that had become the soundtrack of their life together. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered, and Coleman smiled. Still wild out here, he murmured. Even after all these years, still wild, just the way we like it, Wilhelmina replied. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had shone on them that first night they walked together, that had witnessed their wedding and the births of their children, and every moment of joy and sorrow in between. The cabin stood solid behind them, expanded and improved, but still fundamentally the same structure Coleman had built with his own hands all those years ago. The creek ran its eternal course, the mountains rose in the distance, and the life they had chosen continued to unfold with its mixture of simplicity and complexity. In the years that followed, they continued to live quietly in their mountain home, surrounded by family and the community they had become integral parts of. They watched more grandchildren arrive, watched Grace's medical practice flourish, watched Samuel build his own cabin just down the valley with his wife and children. They took slow walks together, read books on the porch, tended a smaller but still productive garden, and spent evenings by the fire talking about everything and nothing. When Coleman was 73, he developed a cough that lingered through the winter and into spring. Grace examined him with professional concern and prescribed rest, but they all knew it was more serious than that. His lungs had been weakened by years of breathing smoke from campfires and cabins, of pushing himself through bitter mountain winters. By summer, he was confined mostly to the cabin, too weak to take the walks he loved. Wilhelmina nursed him with the same fierce devotion he had always shown her. She read to him when he was too tired to read himself, held his hand through the difficult nights, made sure he was comfortable and surrounded by love. The family visited constantly, and Coleman spent long afternoons talking with his children and grandchildren, passing down stories and wisdom, making sure they knew how much he loved them. One evening in late August, with the sunset painting the valley in shades of gold and purple visible through their bedroom window, Coleman squeezed Wilhelmina's hand and smiled at her. "Thank you," he said softly, "for 43 years of happiness I never thought I would have. For choosing to stay in Colfax all those years ago." "For choosing me too," Wilhelmina replied, tears running down her face. "We chose each other, and it was the best choice I ever made." "No regrets?" he asked, his voice fading. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one. I love you, Coleman Quade. I have loved you since the day you defended my right to choose my own path, and I will love you for whatever time remains to me." "I love you too," he whispered. "More than mountains, more than wilderness, more than anything. You were my home, Wilhelmina. You were always my home." He died peacefully an hour later, with Wilhelmina holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed, in the cabin he had built, in the life they had created together. The grief was profound but not crushing, because Wilhelmina knew they had been blessed with more love and happiness than most people ever found. They had built a life of purpose and passion, raised children who carried their values forward, created a legacy that would outlast them both. She lived for another 7 years after Coleman's passing, continuing to be the matriarch of their growing family, watching more grandchildren and even great-grandchildren arrive. She wrote down the story of their life together, of how she had refused to return to Sacramento, of how Coleman had understood and supported her choice, of how they had built something beautiful from courage and love. On a spring morning when she was 83, Wilhelmina walked slowly out to the overlook where Coleman had first brought her all those years ago. She stood looking at the valley, at Colfax visible in the distance, at the mountains beyond, and she felt profoundly content. She had lived a good life, a full life, exactly the life she had chosen when she was 20 years old and terrified but determined. When her family found her that evening, she was sitting peacefully on the rock, a slight smile on her face, looking out at the view she had loved for more than 60 years. She had passed away quietly, painlessly, surrounded by the wilderness and beauty that had defined her chosen life. They buried her beside Coleman on their property, under a tall pine with a view of the mountains. The whole community came to pay respects, along with family from all over California. Grace spoke at the service, telling the story of how her mother had refused to return to Sacramento, how she had chosen freedom and found love, how she had lived life on her own terms with courage and grace. "She taught us all," Grace said, tears streaming down her face, "that the bravest thing you can do is choose your own path, even when everyone else insists you are making a mistake. She taught us that true love supports freedom rather than restricting it. And she taught us that a life well lived is not measured by wealth or status, but by authenticity and connection, and the courage to be wholly yourself." The cabin remained in the family, passed down through the generations along with the story of Coleman and Wilhelmina. It became a gathering place, a reminder of what could be built from nothing more than determination and love. And every time someone in the family faced a difficult choice, a moment where they had to decide between what others expected and what they truly wanted, they remembered Wilhelmina refusing to return to town, staying in Colfax, building a life that was entirely her own. They remembered Coleman understanding, supporting, becoming her partner in that life, rather than trying to control or change her. They remembered that love, real love, was about choosing each other freely every single day, about building something together that honored both people completely. The legacy of that choice, made on a dusty California street in 1872, rippled forward through the years, touching lives and shaping decisions for generations. It became part of the family mythology, the story told and retold of courage and love and the power of refusing to live someone else's life. And in the quiet evenings when the wind moved through the pines and the creek sang its eternal song, those who visited the cabin swore they could feel the presence of the two people who had built it, who had chosen each other and this place, who had understood that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stay exactly where you were and build the life you wanted rather than accepting the one others had planned for you. The mountains endured, as they always had. The valley remained beautiful, seasons cycling through their eternal patterns, and the cabin stood solid, a testament to what could be created when two people found each other and decided, against all odds and expectations, to build something real and lasting and entirely their own. In the end, Wilhelmina's refusal to return to Sacramento had been about more than just escaping an unwanted marriage. It had been about claiming her own life, her own choices, her own future. And in staying in Colfax, in building a cabin in the foothills, in raising children and teaching students and growing old with Coleman, she had proven that the life you choose for yourself, no matter how unconventional or difficult, will always be richer and more meaningful than the life others choose for you. She had lived and loved, and left behind a legacy of courage and authenticity that would continue to inspire long after she was gone. And that, more than any wealth or status or social approval she might have gained in Sacramento, was a life well lived, a choice well made, a love story for the ages. The mountains remembered, the valley remembered, and the family remembered, passing down the story of the woman who refused to return to town, who stayed in Colfax, and the mountain man who understood, who loved her for exactly that courage, who built a life with her that honored both their truths. It was a story of the Wild West, of the 1870s California frontier, of a time when life was hard but honest, when choices had weight, when love meant partnership and respect as much as passion. It was a story that remained relevant long after the Wild West had become history, because the fundamental truth at its core was eternal. Choose your own path. Find someone who supports that choice rather than trying to control it. Build a life together that honors both people completely. Love with courage and authenticity, and never ever let anyone else tell you who you should be or what your life should look like. That was the lesson Wilhelmina Rosewood and Coleman Quade had taught through their lives and their love. That was the legacy they had left. And that was the story that would be told and retold for as long as there were people who needed to hear that it was possible to choose freedom, to find love, to build something beautiful from nothing more than courage and the willingness to stay when everyone else was telling you to go. The cabin in the foothills stood as proof of that possibility, solid and enduring, a monument to choice and love and the wild, beautiful frontier life that had shaped them both. And in the quiet moments when the light slanted golden through the pines and the creek whispered its ancient song, you could almost see them there still, Wilhelmina and Coleman, sitting on their porch, holding hands, looking out at the valley they had chosen, the life they had built, the love that had sustained them through everything. They had chosen each other. They had chosen this place. They had chosen freedom. And in doing so, they had created something that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of refusing to live someone else's life, and the beauty of finding someone who understood that refusal, who supported it, who loved you not despite it but because of it. That was their story. That was their legacy. That was the life they had lived and the love they had shared, and it was everything, absolutely everything, that mattered.